Guys, American troops ready to go in. This is after the Battle of the Bulge, after the Yalta Conference. Okay, American Army crosses the Rhine River in Germany on March 7th, 1945. So the Rhine's the largest river in Central Europe. So it's kind of like one last line of defense for the Germans. Now we have a decision to make. Remember, we just got done talking to Stalin about what Europe's going to look like after the war. Now, if we keep pushing and we get to Berlin and maybe even take Prague, where's Prague? What country? What? Czechoslovakia. Now remember, before World War II, Czechoslovakia was the only democratic nation in Central Europe, true democracy. And so if we can get to Prague, get to Berlin, we can hold Stalin's feet to the fire. Say, look, you're not going to interfere in these countries. But if we do that, more Americans are going to die. If we let the Russians do it, then fewer Americans will die. So Eisenhower makes the decision to let the Russians take Berlin and Prague. Now, this is going to have big consequences, long-lasting consequences. So Churchill tried to warn us. It's like, listen, you can't trust this guy. We wanted to avoid these casualties. And as I talked about yesterday, guys, once the Red Army rolls in, they don't leave for 40 years. They're going to impose communism on all these countries and more. And so, little play on words here. Eastern Europe will go from Nazi tyranny to commie tyranny. All right. Now, this does save American lives, and we will mop up those Germans. Now, we're going to stop about 50 miles west of Berlin. So the Soviets will take Berlin. Now, the Soviets have lost between 20 and 25 million people in this war. We lose about 450,000. The Russians hate the Germans. You understand? So when they go into Berlin, Hitler did not allow the civilians to leave the city. He made them stay and fight. We're talking, again, like 13-year-old kids trying to defend the city of Berlin. Okay? When the Russians went in, they took out their vengeance on the civilians, especially the women, because this is well documented. Russian troops will rape and pillage the city. And when we're talking about rape here, guys, we're talking about gang rape. Like where women will be brutalized in front of their families by the Russian troops. Now, had the Americans taken Berlin, would that have happened? No. Our army is disciplined. Now, guys, in every American war that we've ever fought in, have we had soldiers do bad things? Yeah, I mean, I showed you the clip from Saving Private Ryan. At one point in that movie, right, 2 German soldiers put up their hands and surrender, and our guys shoot them. That's not supposed to happen. So sometimes our soldiers misbehave. There's no question. But not like this, and not on this scale. So what happened in Berlin could have been prevented. But we let the Russians do it. Okay, now, American troops and Russian troops will meet at the Elbe River, which I'll show you as soon as we're all caught up on the notes here. I can put up the map. You good? Okay, I'll give you some more time. They'll meet at this Elbe River, about 50 miles west of Berlin. And it's a celebration. The Allied troops meeting, one from the east, one from the west. Guys are swimming across the river, celebrating Americans and Russians, exchanging cigarettes, you know, high five. They didn't do high fives back then, but you know what I mean. And, you know, so things were okay. And then, guys, I like to use this analogy. So things were warm, they were happy, embraces, and then the river froze. Like, it turns cold, what we call the Cold War. Now, the Cold War doesn't really start until about 48. But Stalin is already breaking his promises. Okay. And it's going to lead to conflict between the United States and the Soviet Union without open war, which is the Cold War. So conflict without actual war, Cold War. Okay. All right, so let me show you this map. Map of Germany. Okay, here's Berlin. So Berlin is in the east. Okay. Most of these big cities, guys, are going to be bombed. So Germany is like, it's been hit hard. Okay, their people are going to be suffering after the war. Now, as a history teacher teaching World War II, I need to mention this, okay? And it's this city right here. It's called Dresden. At the end of the war, there's probably 3 to 4 weeks left in the war. The United States and Britain decided to bomb this city in the east. Did it have some military significance to it for the Germans? Yes. Was it a big military industrial city? No. You have a lot of refugees because the Russians are coming across, okay? The Germans are retreating. You got people trying to get away from the war, a lot of civilians passing through Dresden, a lot of civilians that live there. We were going to bomb this city for 3 days. The British at night, the Americans during the day, using incendiary weapons. These are going to cause fires. The entire city will burn. It is such a large fire, guys, that it is consuming all of the oxygen in the city. Like, it's when you get that big of a fire, it sucks up all the oxygen. So when they found the bodies of people, tens of thousands, many of them had suffocated, not smoke inhalation, not burned to death. They had no air to breathe because the fire was that big. Okay. So Dresden kind of becomes the poster child of the anti-war movement, along with the atomic bombs after the war. People point to this city and say, this should never happen again. Now, Churchill gets a lot of the blame for this. And I used to teach a class called War and Peace when students signed up for it and they gave it to me to teach. Okay, it's a military history class. And I'd have students pick a battle and they, research it and present it to the class. And I had multiple students do the bombing of Dresden. And I had some students come back and say it was justified, and others said it was not justified. But what some people theorize is because Churchill wanted this, was that he knew Soviet troops would be coming through Dresden. And he wanted the Soviets to see what the RAF and the U.S. Army Air Forces were capable of doing to, say, Moscow, if they didn't do what they said they were going to do. Okay? And certainly the Russians came through there and they saw it. And they saw a lot of dead people too. Okay? There's a book on this called Slaughterhouse 5, written by a guy named Kurt Vonnegut. Okay? And it details this whole situation. And some of your English teachers probably have it in their room. Okay? I know Fox does. So, it's a very famous piece of literature. Okay? So, it's just something I have to talk about if I'm teaching the war. Okay? So, Dresden. All right? So, this is what Europe looks like by 1948. Okay? The Red Army rolls in, and they don't leave. So Bulgaria, Romania, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, this will become East Germany. Germany is going to be divided between 4 countries: U.S., British, French, don't know why, and the Russians. Okay? 4 countries. Austria, similarly, will be broken up into 4 sectors. Now, eventually, by 55, Austria, all troops are out, they become a neutral country. Sweden's neutral, Switzerland's neutral, okay? Ireland's neutral. Now, Albania is under the Soviet control. These countries here become known as satellite countries. You know how satellites orbit the Earth? So these countries that orbit the outside of Russia that are now under their control, satellite nations. Now, Yugoslavia, which today includes countries like Serbia, Bosnia, Herzegovina, Croatia, Kosovo, and so forth. These countries are also communist in Yugoslavia, which is run by a guy named Marshal Tito after the war. He does not take his orders from Stalin, and therefore it is not in the color red here. Now, these blue countries are countries that are going to join NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which is our treaty, our organization. Okay? United States is the backbone of that organization, and it's still around 80 years later, 75 years later. Okay? So it's NATO versus the Warsaw Pact. Okay? And that's what we're going to be seeing in the Cold War. So this, I'm foreshadowing a little bit what we'll be talking about in the next couple of weeks. Okay? Before Christmas. All right? Now, just recently, Sweden, actually Finland, joined NATO. Okay? And now, if you look at the NATO map today, most of these countries are in NATO. All right? So when the Soviet Union collapses in 1989, all of these satellite countries become free. 1989. So Russia, the Soviet Union goes from this big, to this big. So you got Kazakhstan, Mongolia, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, little countries like Georgia, Azerbaijan, Armenia, and then this big one right here, Ukraine. They all break away in 1989. Now the Russians are meddling again in the Ukraine. So that war is going on there, right? We've been talking about it. Okay. So, next slide. Now, Roosevelt is going to die. He will not see VE Day. He will not live to see it. But I think Roosevelt knew when he died that we were going to win in Europe. So that's good. I mean, that the man led us through this. Okay, so Roosevelt leads us through the Great Depression and really victory in Europe. Okay, the Pacific thing is still unsettled. Now, he had been president. Remember, he got elected in 32. He took office in March of 33. So he'd been president March of 33 to April of 45. So just over 12 years he was president. Okay, 12 years and a month or so. So he barely, now remember, we changed inauguration day from March 4th to January 20th. That's the 20th Amendment, the Lame Duck Amendment. Remember that? So he was inaugurated his fourth term on January 20th. So he served about 3 months of his fourth term. And then the weight of the world just falls on this vice president. What's his name? Truman. Okay. So, of course, the nation is going to mourn a president of that. Now, you guys know what a cerebral hemorrhage or a brain aneurysm is, like a blood vessel pops in your brain and the lights go out. I mean, it can happen like that. Just die. And that's what happened to Roosevelt. Obviously, I hope that happens to nobody, but it happens. Okay. It's pretty rare. But as you guys know, if you've ever had a cut on your head, it bleeds a lot. Yes, there's a lot of blood vessels up in here. All right, so Germany surrenders on May 8th, okay? Well, yeah, May 8th, 1945, unconditional surrender. Now, Hitler's going to commit suicide. He's in Berlin, in the bunker. He will marry Eva Braun, his longtime mistress. They will kill the dog, German Shepherd, his dog, and then they will kill themselves. Joseph Goebbels and his family was in the bunker with Hitler. Him and his wife will kill their children and then kill themselves. Goebbels was with Hitler the whole time. Now, you've all heard the conspiracy theory that Hitler escaped Germany and went to South America. Have you heard this? Fled to Venezuela or to Argentina, which was kind of a pro-fascist place at the time. Guys, I've seen no real evidence of that. Okay, about the most definitive thing I've seen about Hitler wanted them to burn his body. They didn't. But I saw an interview with a Russian soldier that was there. They brought his body out of the bunker and they took it to an undisclosed location and they buried it. Okay, it's kind of like Bin Laden. You don't want to create a gravesite for this man, where at some point he becomes a martyr, and they have a memorial and stuff like that. So, like Bin Laden, we just dumped him at sea. Okay, the Soviet soldier said after he was buried, they actually moved the body again so people wouldn't know where it was. Okay, only the Soviets know. Okay, we weren't there. The Americans weren't there. So, did some Nazis escape and come to the Western Hemisphere? Absolutely. And we've been finding them over the last 70 years. Okay, there's some good TV shows, movies, stuff like that on what are called Nazi hunters that try and track these people down. And a lot of them were in South America. Okay, and that's a real thing. They found a guy in Canada about 4 years ago. He was on his deathbed, and they proved that he was a Nazi prison guard. And they brought him back to Israel on his deathbed and put him on trial. They're still looking for these people that may be alive. Now, everybody that generation is really old now. Okay, but there was a guy in Ohio. This is in the 70s that they suspected was this butcher. Like, he was this really bad dude. And there were like these Jews that survived this camp that this guy worked at. And they swore up and down that was him. They took him back to Israel and put him on trial. This is a big international deal. He denied it, but they convicted him. Okay. Yeah, there's a lot of this. There's a crazy movie on this. It's called Apt Pupil. Okay, if you want to look this up. But here's the plot. You got this high school kid about your guys' age. And he's fascinated with this whole thing, the Nazis and stuff. He's reading books about it and so forth. And he sees a picture in this book about the Nazis. And he's, that looks just like my next door neighbor who has a German accent. Okay? And so he starts doing a little digging on this next door neighbor of his, this old guy. And he figures it out. He's a German prison guard. And so this high school kid like blackmails him, makes him dress up in his uniform and stuff, and like messes with his brain. It's really kind of a creepy movie. It's called Apt Pupil. Okay, if you're into that kind of thing. It's freaky. Okay, really eerie. Okay, so this is Trafalgar Square in London. A huge celebration on VE Day. You can see Churchill here, peace instead of victory, or right? Okay. All right. This picture is actually taken after VJ Day in Times Square. Huge celebration in New York. All right. So let's move our attention to the Pacific. Okay. So Truman, leading our efforts in the Pacific, of course, the U.S. Marines, the U.S. Army, in charge of what we're going to call island hopping is General Douglas MacArthur. Now, you've heard that name before. MacArthur was the son of the war hero of the Spanish-American War, Admiral Arthur MacArthur, the Philippines, Spanish-American War. So General MacArthur was born in the Philippines on a naval base. He was raised in the Philippines by his father. And he grew up, joined the Army, and becomes a general. Okay? So when the Philippines was attacked on December 7th, MacArthur was ordered by Roosevelt to flee the country. And he did. And he made the promise. He said, I shall return. It's kind of like an Arnold Schwarzenegger thing. I'll be back. Okay, I shall return. All right. So MacArthur's going to lead this effort across these island chains. Remember, why do we have to take the island? Because what's on the island? Huh? Airstrips. Okay? Because we start bringing our Navy in here, and they got bombers on these airstrips, they're going to take out our Navy. So we got to take them. Then we control the airstrips, and we can start bombing them. So these are the different island chains, guys. The Gilbert Islands, with Tarawa, McKinn, the Marshall Islands, Kwajalein, Ewantok, the Mariana Islands, Saipan, Guam, Tinian. It's actually Tinian Island, which we will start building those B-29 super fortresses, the one at the bottom there, that we're building in Wichita, thousands of them, these bombers. We're going to be able to start bombing the main island of Japan from these islands that we take. Okay? And it's actually Tinian Island that we will launch the B-29 that drops the atomic bombs. Tinian. Okay? Now, my next slide here shows you kind of where we're at. I'll come back and get these notes. But remember, Hawaii, December 41. Midway, June 42, Guadalcanal 42 into 43. That was the first things I showed you guys early on. So as you get into 43, 44, and 45, you're moving across Marshall Islands, Carolina Islands, Guam, okay? Moving towards the Philippines. So October of 44, the largest naval battle in the history of the world will take place in the Philippines. It's called the Battle of Leyte Gulf. There's 900 islands in the Philippines. So there's a lot of ins and outs between these islands and so forth for the U.S. Navy and the Japanese Navy to battle. Okay? The Australians are there too. They're helping and so forth. So once the Battle of Leyte Gulf is won, we're able to invade the islands of the Philippines. Okay? And then we work our way up. Here's Saipan, which I'm going to show you a video at the end of the lecture today from Saipan. Okay? And then you get 45, Iwo Jima, which we'll talk about today, and Okinawa. Where on the previous slide, it shows we had 8,000 Marines die on Iwo Jima, which is the worst battle in the history of the Marines. And 12,000 Army and Marines will die on Okinawa. Some of you guys have seen the movie, what's the movie? Hacksaw Ridge. Hacksaw Ridge. Okay, that's Okinawa. Okay. Now, some of these islands have indigenous populations, like people that live on these islands. Some of them don't. Okay, like Iwo Jima is just a volcanic island. Nobody lives there. Okay, so I'll go back to this slide. And so you can see here, guys, this is going to be costly at human life on both sides. Okay, so on Iwo Jima, where we lose 8,000, there's about 23,000 Japanese soldiers on this island. Okay, and this is one of the things I want to point out to you. Remember when we captured 250,000 Germans in North Africa? Out of the 23,000 Japanese soldiers on this island, we will capture about 25. The rest will either die fighting or they will take their own lives rather than be captured. They don't surrender, which means that's going to cause the heavy death toll of American troops. So these are things to keep in mind as we get to the end of the war. How many of you guys have Mr. Legenfeld? Religion. Okay. From what I heard, you guys haven't talked about the atomic bomb yet.
Yesterday.
Oh, you did? A little bit? Yeah. So, Mr. Legenfeld and I have had conversations about the atomic bomb. He teaches religion in a Catholic school. Okay. I'm a history teacher. Okay. Now, we have two different views on the atomic bomb, the two of us. In fact, we've had some pleasant debates about In fact, we kind of talked about doing a debate in front of the student body about it, but I think that's unfair to me. Okay, because if you study, you guys know what just war is, the Catholic view of just war. Proportionality, there's a lot of different things you take into consideration whether a war is just or not. And if you look at all the American wars we've ever fought, there's maybe two that were just. World War II and the American Revolution. And maybe not even the American Revolution. Okay. If you strictly look at just war theory. Okay. So in a Catholic school setting, I probably would be at a disadvantage in that debate. Okay. But on the test, the easiest question of the year, it's an opinion question, so you can't get it wrong. So I'll give you 2 points for it on the next test. Okay. And the question is going to be yes or no. Should have Truman used the bombs or not? So in forming your opinion on this, you need the whole story. Okay? Not just the story of the suffering of the Japanese, but the suffering of the Americans and what could have become had we had to invade the island itself. Okay? So I'm going to try and paint that whole picture for you. All right? Both today and on Monday. All right? So you can see the death toll here on these two items. Okay? What lays ahead for us? Now, they're talking about we're going to need close to 1 million troops to invade Japan. The guys that had just won victory in Europe, some of them start getting orders. They're not going back home. They're going to the Pacific. Okay, so you just spent 4 years in Europe, and now you're getting orders to find a boat to the Pacific. Okay. Now, a lot of those guys were on the way to the Pacific when the war ended. Those guys did not have to fight. Now, you can ask those guys whether we should have used the bomb or not. I think you're going to get a pretty common answer there. Okay. And if you ask our soldiers who they would rather fight, those that fought in both theaters, rather fight the Germans or the Japanese, you're going to get a pretty common answer there as well. Okay. These islands were brutal. They're tropical islands. The Japanese are dug into them. Okay. So let me point some of this out to you. Who would you rather fight? Oh, you'd much rather fight the Germans. Oh, yeah. Because the Japanese don't surrender. They'll fight you to the death. Would you rather fight somebody that with overwhelming odds, they're like, we can't win this battle? We give up? Like happened in North Africa? Or you want the guy that's going to kill you or kill himself? He's going to die either way. I don't. That's not a hard answer. Question to answer, is it? Okay. This is Iwo Jima. Okay. Now, there's a really good movie on this called Flags of Our Fathers. You've all seen this? Now, some of you have seen the statue of this, the bronze statue in Washington, D.C., March for Life. Did you guys go, any of you go on that? Did you go see the statue, the bronze statue of this? Photograph. It's a famous photograph. It's the Marines raising the flag on Mount Suribachi on Iwo Jima. It's a volcanic island. Nobody lives there. The Japanese have 3 airstrips at the end of this island. We're going to bomb this island for 70 straight days before we invade it. It does almost nothing to the Japanese. They are dug in underground, miles and miles and miles of tunnels underneath Iwo Jima. So all that bombing did nothing. So we're going to land the Marines on this island. Okay? And what do the Japanese do? They let us come onto the island. They don't try and stop us. Okay? Now this is black sand. Okay? It's nasty. So we're gonna land just on the other side of this mountain, right over here. Okay? The objective is to cut the island in half and take the mountain, okay, and then break out across and take the airfield. as soon as our guys get off the beach and start going onto the island, the Japanese are dug in, machine gun nests, artillery, and it's a bloodbath. It's horrible. Okay? Within 2 days, we take the mountain, plant the flag. The battle for Iwo Jima will last another 4 weeks. Okay? Taking the rest of the island. Now, as we're taking this mountain, we're hearing explosions inside the mountain. Japanese are dug into the mountain as well. They're like, what is that? What is that noise? They get into some of these tunnels in the mountain, and they just see bodies, Japanese soldiers blowing themselves up rather than being captured with grenades. Okay? They're horrified. Okay? Then they break out, and it's, guys, it's tough. 8,000 Marines are going to die. Okay? On Okinawa, there's Japanese civilians. Okay? And so, you know, I just finished watching the Pacific, and it's horrible what happens. The Japanese, who like to attack at night, taking the Japanese civilians, and they're sending them towards our lines. And if you hear anything, you start shooting. Okay, that's your job. You hear somebody coming towards you, you start shooting. It's the Japanese. No, it's Japanese civilians that the Japanese soldiers are sending towards our lines. So you wake up the next morning, you see women and children that you just butchered. You didn't know it was women and children. You thought it was the Japanese, the soldiers. Okay, it's horrible what's going on here. Okay, and we're going to lose 12,000 guys on that. You saw Hacksaw Ridge. You saw how brutal that was. Okay, so you got to take all of this into consideration. So when they start looking at the invasion of Japan itself, with 1 million guys, they're looking at casualty rates of up to 250,000 men, Americans. Now, the B-29 bomber, guys, once we start taking these islands, we're hitting Japan hard with regular bombs, incendiary. We're bombing Tokyo. We're bombing Kobe, these big cities. We're trying to get the Japanese to quit. We'll give you a statistic, guys. More Japanese are going to die from conventional bombing of the cities than are going to die from the atomic bombs. What the atomic bombs do is kill everybody within a 2-mile radius almost instantly. And then you have the after effects, the radiation that lingers for years. Okay? But it ends the war. So, you got to take all these things into consideration. Okay? So, I'm kind of teaching past. I'm going to show you some video at the end because I'm recording. I can't show the video recording. So, a couple videos we'll watch. This will be the last notes for today. Now, here's General MacArthur. This is a very famous photograph because it was staged. MacArthur said, "I shall return." So he wants to make sure that the media is there when he returns. They have the boat stop short of the beach so he can actually wade up through the water onto the beach. Okay, he's got his corncob pipe and his Ray-Ban sunglasses, and there's lots of pictures of this because they're there. Okay, like Patton and others, he's an egomaniac. Okay, he wants the glory. Okay, and yeah, MacArthur. Now, MacArthur, when this is all said and done, guys, is going to be the governor of Japan for 5 years. Remember, unconditional surrender. Guys, we are going to take over Japan. We're going to pacify them, demilitarize them, help rebuild their economy, and then turn it back over to them. We wrote their constitution for them. The Constitution that the Japanese use today was written by the United States. And guess what? They're one of our best friends that we have on this planet. The Japanese people are lovely. Are they xenophobic? Yes. Do they like foreigners? No. Okay? But they're very peaceful people. When we got attacked on 9/11, the Japanese sent troops to Afghanistan with us. Did they have to? No. They weren't part of NATO. They just did it because we're friends. Okay? And we've had the Japanese back ever since. We've got their back. They got our back. Okay? If the crap goes down with China at some day in the future, Japan's going to be on our side. Okay? So MacArthur governs Japan. So he's in Japan in 1950 when the Korean War breaks out. So guess who's going to be in charge during the Korean War? This guy, MacArthur. Until he gets fired by Truman. We'll save that for another day. MacArthur's a hero, man. A lot of people wanted this guy to run for president. Okay. He did. His last words in public, old soldiers never die. They just fade away. General MacArthur. His parting words. Now, we land in October. We don't take Manila till March. So 5 months to retake the Philippines. Heavy fighting. Okay. My honor students have to do interviews. It's one of their projects they have to do. And I had a student interview a guy that went into Manila with he was an American soldier, went into Manila and got to MacArthur's office building where his headquarters were. And so he was the first soldier into MacArthur's office when they retook the building. So there was an ashtray on the desk, okay, that had General MacArthur's name on it. He picked it up and put it in his pocket. Brought it home as a souvenir. Okay. Pretty good souvenir. Okay. So we will grant the Philippines their independence in 1946, as promised. The Tidings-McDuffie Act of 1934 said we were going to give the Japanese their independence in 12 years. There it is, July 4th, 1946. No irony in that. Okay, our Independence Day. All right. We get a 99-year lease for a military base in the Philippines, of which we took them up on. But guys, unfortunately, some of our soldiers over the years did some bad things while they were in the Philippines. You know, there were a couple of rapes, and so the Philippines asked us to leave, and we left. And then they asked us to come back. So Philippines has some issues with radical Islam as well. There's a group there called Abu Sayyaf, which is linked to Al Qaeda, and they were kidnapping people, holding them hostage, and stuff like that. So they asked us to come back and help train their soldiers. Actually, there was a couple from Rose Hill, Kansas, that were missionaries in the Philippines that were captured by this group, and they made a rescue attempt to get them out. Martin and Gracia Burnham were their names, and in the rescue attempt, he was killed, but Gracia, she survived. Came back to Rose Hill and wrote a book about her experiences. My wife read the book and met her and stuff. But so yeah, today the Philippines. I don't know if you guys know anything about the Philippines. They've got this president named Duarte. They've had a lot of corruption in the Philippines over there. Imelda Marcos, and you know, they've had some corruption. But this guy, he's a character. So they're trying to get rid of like drugs in the Philippines. So like if you get busted with marijuana in the Philippines, it's a death penalty. Look, this guy Duarte, it's President Duarte, he's nuts, man. This guy's crazy. And he's like Trump. He's like, listen, he's going to tell you what he's thinking. And you may not like what he's thinking, but he's going to tell you. Okay? He's kind of a nut job. But that's the Philippines today. Okay? All right. So I'm going to wrap this up. I'm going to show you a video. that's hard to watch. Okay, so we're gonna ask Ronnie to leave here in a minute, but I think you need to see it. Okay,